Good morning. We're continuing with Rabbi Steif's holy work on divine commandments that God Almighty lovingly gives to every single human being.
Our goal and obligation is to get this message to every single human being. Not only can you share this, but help us get it out there. Please support and donate to help this work. We need your help to get it to every single human being. This is essential action we could all take. It's not possible for any human being to be enslaved and under the terror of other human beings. And it can be stopped immediately as soon as we get this message to every single human being. And everyone will take action. Donate at rabbismith.org.
And we're in the midst of understanding the commandment not to go in the way of those human beings who are innocently and temporarily mistakenly choosing to do things that are not in accordance with God Almighty's will. So there's a commandment where we are human beings, where we are designed, and God Almighty wants us to work with other people. In fact, when it says that Adam Harishon, the first man, he's told that he's going to have to work with the sweat of his brow for bread. The reason is because bread is a food that you cannot do by yourself. If you think about all the things that you have, food, you could have vegetables, you could have fruits, you pick it off the tree. There's many different things that you could do by yourself, very simple, but bread is a complex process that requires team effort. And it is most common for people to do it in conjunction with others. We see that there's a tremendous division of labor between the different components of creating bread. So we see that human beings need to work together. We cannot live in isolation. And the whole concept of economy, which is God Almighty's really a blessing, that we're able to work together to each contribute our unique contribution based on God Almighty's gifts of the special talents and insights that each one of us has. So this requires working with other people. And we also see that everything that we do is meant to be in conjunction with other people. So we have to be in a relationship with a spouse to bring children into the world. We have to be, and that's the first commandment and blessing for every human being. We have to we come together for celebrations, for weddings, for things that are not so happy but are also communal events. Let's say a funeral, God forbid. We need to have teachers to teach our children, to dedicate them into the service of God Almighty, and the list goes on. Most people are not in a position to provide all their own needs. So if you're going to have clothing, even if you're a very talented farmer, you're going to hire someone to make the wool or make the sheets of cotton and so forth. So furniture, there's so many. One guy cuts down the little trees, another guy makes the furniture, and then it goes back to the person that has who cut down the logs, and he buys the furniture back from the guy that bought the logs from him. And this is the blessing, the divine blessing of economy, the flow of money and the flow of resources in order for us to each help us create greater good in our lives. So we have the spiritual aspect of getting together with people, the joyful aspect, we have the economic aspects of it. And so we are always going to be in connection with other people. The question is, what happens when we come into connection with other people? We are easily influenced by other people. What other people are doing, their way of dress, their way of speech, and so forth is entirely impressionable upon us. And one of the conditions that I have is I don't like to be in the presence of people that use epithets, that use curse words. And the reason is because it's very, very important to realize that it's not just that the words are offensive to me, or I don't like the words, I don't want to hear the words. But if I expose myself to people who use curse words, if I leave it unattended to, I will eventually be influenced by them. And so what I say to them is, when someone calls me up, and if he's talking about a situation, he starts using curse words, I'll say to him, I'll let him one time, let it go. But if he starts, I see that this is part of the way he speaks. And I say to him, excuse me, but I charge for curse words It's $500 every time you want to use a curse word. And the person laughs, and then he doesn't use them anymore. So that we are very, very influenced by the people around us. And based on the people that we choose, we're going to be influenced. The great Chafetz Chaim, a great Torah sage from around the turn of the 1900s, early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, you would make a celebratory meal every year, a Sudas Haidah, a meal celebrating gratitude to God Almighty for his goodness to him, for a time that when what happened was the great thing that he wants to celebrate is that when he was a young man, I don't know if it was before his bar mitzvah, around the time of his bar mitzvah, 11 to 13 years old, I don't remember the exact age, he had a friend who he saw was going in the wrong direction and was a bad influence on him. And this young man, separated himself from this friend. And he thanked God every year for that great kindness that he was able to go on the correct course in the service of God Almighty. And the result was that the Chafetz Chaim became one of the great Torah sages that has provided guidance and light for the children of Israel for this 120 years. And everyone still learns his holy works. So this is something that we have to take to heart and recognize the tremendous influence that other people have on us. And I'll give you another example. There's a very important point. People should not talk in the synagogue during the prayer services. So I was in a place and there was some talking, and I felt that it was very important to speak openly about it, that people should not be speaking during the prayer services. And I realized that it was not just because I want to be zealous for God and I want to honor the holy sanctuary, the miniature sanctuary of the house of prayer of the synagogue, and not just because I want quiet and to be able to focus on my prayers, but I realized that if I did not take action to influence these other people to stop talking during prayer services, then within a very short period of time, I myself will be speaking during the prayer services. Because the human nature is, the way God Almighty created us, is that I will be influenced by other people. So when I see that it's okay for other people to talk, and I treat it as okay, because even though I might be annoyed and think they're not doing the right thing, but I'm allowing it to go unhindered and I'm associating myself with those people, then eventually I'll say a word here or there, and eventually I'll find something that's important enough to talk about during the middle of the prayer services, because I will be in a milieu, I'll be in a surrounding where that becomes the norm, and that becomes acceptable, and I will be influenced by that. So therefore, I have two options. I have the first option is to say to other people, this is not appropriate, don't do this. And if they listen, wonderful, that's providing spiritual influence to uplift other people. And if they don't respond, then I have to withdraw from that situation. I don't have to make a big fuss about it necessarily. I could just quietly extract myself from that situation, recognizing that while I've tried to influence them, this is not a good place for me. Spiritually, I'm going to be influenced by them, and I need to move away. So this is a lesson for all of us, and it relates to what we're talking about here, because we see that as human beings, we are going to be influenced by what's around us. We cannot help but be influenced. And we have two choices. We have the choice of not doing anything about what other people are doing, and struggling to maintain our dedication into the service of God Almighty and not be influenced by them. And that is absolutely essential. But at the same time, it's very important to be influencing them, to uplift them, because if we are merely just trying to hold the line, so to speak, then we run the risk we will be influenced by them in very, very subtle ways that we cannot even imagine, that we would deny at the outset any intent to be influenced, and we would declare and protest the suggestion that we be influenced by them, but we will be influenced unless we are the ones being the influencers. So what we're learning here is how the nations, the non-Jewish nations, they can be very focused on their customs and practices that are not in accordance with God Almighty's will. We discussed last week in great detail the importance of understanding that God Almighty does intend that each nation, each clan, each family does have its own customs and practices, and those are honored and they should be maintained and enjoyed and are very important. But where they are not in accordance with God Almighty's divine will, then they're not something that we should be emulating. But also, while we're talking here primarily the commandment, do not walk in the paths of those that their actions and their conduct and their dress and their speeches is foreign to the service of God Almighty. Well, the primary focus here is to stay away from that, not emulate that, and not copy it. Nevertheless, we have to understand that the only way to really truly prevail is to be a positive influence on those other people and to show them by way of example in our own dress and our own speech, in our own mannerisms and so forth, what it is, what is important, and a proper way to conduct ourselves, and also then to not just that's kind of a active passive way, you could say, like just dressing properly is having an influence on people, but then there's going up to the person and speaking to them and saying, you know, your way of dress is encouraging idolatry or encouraging licentiousness, God forbid, and therefore I'd like to encourage you as a human being created in God Almighty's divine image to not dress that way or not listen to that music or so forth, so on and so forth. So let's look now and continue with what Rabbi Steif is sharing with us over here and explaining to us to guide us in how to conduct ourselves. And the question is, it says, don't go in the way of the nations that are not serving God Almighty. And we quoted verses at the beginning that said, don't go in the ways, in the customs and the practices of these nations, referring to the nations that live in the land of Canaan, the land of Canaan, which is the land, the Holy Land is the land of Israel. And the question is this, that we should not emulate the ways of those that lived in Canaan. Does it apply, this prohibition or this warning, don't go in their ways, does it apply only to the nations, that we should not emulate the ways of those nations, those 7 nations? Does it apply to the world as a whole? If you come across a nation in a different part of the world, whether it's European, Asian, African, Australian, and or in the Americas, do we say, well, the Torah only mentioned don't emulate the 7 nations, so therefore I don't have a prohibition against doing the customs and practices of the nations in other places? So let's see what it says. We learn over here in this page Shin base 352 in paragraph Zion. We are in the middle of chapter 35, Lamed Hey, and on the right side you'll see over here paragraph Zion. V'ayim bechinuch, see in the chinuch, which we said is a compilation of the commandments in the Torah, that according to the order that they appear in the Torah, demuchach the ikar halav shalolis damas the minhage sheva umeis v'misvar nilmad shehu adin l'shar umeis. So the chinuch says that the main focus of the wording and the expression of this prohibition, and not to emulate the customs of the 7 nations, that's what the verse is explicitly referring to. But it is logical to learn from that this is the same din, this is the same practical instruction in relation to the rest of the nations, that how we are to not emulate the improper practices of any nation in the world, all the nations. Usvar daraisahu, and this is a logical extrapolation that is a Torah logic, meaning to say it is clearly on the face of what the Torah is saying, because the Torah is saying, don't emulate these people, because even though the things that we're warning against emulating now are not outright idolatrous or outright violations of laws of idolatry, are not outright violations of sexual immorality and so forth, because if they were outright, they're already prohibited. This conduct is already prohibited by the direct prohibitions against the idolatrous or immoral actions. So this is talking about things where it is related to, it is part of, but not directly a violation. So let's say immodest dress. The problem with immodest dress is that immodest dress is intended to and will lead to immorality. So, but the Torah says don't be immoral, don't have forbidden relations. So it's when the Torah says don't emulate the ways of these 7 nations in their immodesty and in their customs that relate to idolatry, but are not directly idolatrous. So the Torah is telling us this is dangerous for you. Don't emulate them, because you're going to end up not only emulating the immodesty and the dress and the code of conduct and so forth that is related to idolatry. You will end up emulating them even further, these nations, and actually practicing immorality, God forbid, and idolatry, God forbid. So this is a Torah logic that, since it's a warning against a practice because you're going to come to violate all these other commandments in the Torah as a result, God forbid, therefore it's logical, according to the Torah, a Torah logic, that you should not emulate these practices no matter which nation has these practices, wherever they are in the world, not just these 7 nations. So this is a svar deraisahu. This is a logic of the Torah. We are compelled by logic to see that this same rule must apply in any country and any nation's practices. If they're not in accordance with God Almighty's will, then we should make sure not to emulate them. And in the nether holy sefer Hayirim, muchach the ikar halav kai al eretz Mitzrayim ve'eretz Canaan, and that the essential focus of the commandment, the negative commandment, is referring to the land of Egypt, ve'eretz Canaan, and the land of Canaan, the Hainu Zayin Amim, meaning to say the 7 nations that resided in the land of Israel. Avol b'sefer Elah mitzvahs, but in the book, the holy book, these are the commandments. Kasav, he writes over there, Shalo te'emar shalo asa Torah ki'im b'chukas ha'emori b'chavarov. It doesn't. Don't say that the Torah only forbade to go in the customs and the laws of the Emori, one of the nations, and its neighbors. The Torah says, I will separate you from the nations in order to be mine, says God Almighty. If you are separated from the nations, then you are mine, says God Almighty. And so forth. The Sefer Bris Menucha, Tzayin La Sanhedrin, Nun Beis Amud Aleph, the Mashma Dekai Al Kol Umis. In the holy book, the Bris Menucha, the covenant of tranquility, he refers to the Talmud in Sanhedrin, the tractate of Sanhedrin, in the 52nd page on the first side. It's implied over there. It's understandable that it's referring to all the nations. We should not emulate any of the nations. So he's gone through different opinions over here. He brought 4 different opinions. One is the chinuch that says that while the main focus is on those 7 nations, it makes sense that it applies to the other nations based on Torah logic. The Nether Sefer Hayirim says that no, it's really referring to essentially to the 7 nations and to the land of Egypt. And then he brings the Elah HaMitzvahs that say, don't say it's only the 7 nations. Rather, we see from another verse that says, I'm separating you from the nations, that it means all the nations, in order that you should be mine. And then he brings the 4th opinion from the Bris Menucha that says that it is referring to, he brings a Talmudic source, that it is referring to all the nations. So if we pay attention here for a second, we see that we are arriving at 3 of these 4 sources are arriving at the same conclusion, and one is more focused on sticking to the wording of the verse that says, don't be like the Egyptians and don't be like the Canaanites. But you'll see that the chinuch arrives at the conclusion that all the nations are covered by this prohibition not to emulate the nations that are their practices are foreign to God Almighty. Don't emulate their foreign practices. He does that based on Torah logic. The other sefer, the Elam Mitzvos, his reasoning comes from another verse in the Torah that says, I'm going to separate you from all the nations in order to be mine. So obviously, the prohibition of not emulating the Canaanites and the Egyptians, which is part of the process of being separated from the other nations. So obviously, there's another Torah verse that expands that to say, don't be like any of the nations in their improper conduct in order that you should be mine, says God Almighty. So he brings a Torah verse. The first one brought Torah logic. The second one based his decision on Torah logic. The second one bases it on another verse. And the third one that's coming to the same conclusion, the Sefer Bris Menucha, is bringing it based on a source in the Talmud of the sage. The Torah sages are discussing all the applications of the oral Torah and the written Torah and how to apply in every situation based on thousands of years of these discussions, starting with Adam, the first man, and the oral Torah that's given on Mount Sinai to Moses and through Moses to the Jewish people to carry it to be a light and a guidance for the entire world. That oral Torah is hundreds and millions of hours of conversation and discussion and debate about how to understand it and how to bring it into a fruitful and productive, abundant life for every single human being. And there is a place where he comes to the conclusion that itself is somewhere in the Talmudic discussion. There's something that is pointing us in the direction that this applies to all the nations. So you could see that there could be multiple ways to arrive at the conclusion here that this is applying to all, not to emulate any of the nations, not just don't emulate the nations of the 7 nations and the land of Egypt. Okay, now, continuing on, feel free to post questions in the chat if you'd like. Ches. Paragraph 8, the Sham Kasav, and there it's written in this holy work that we just quoted, he is going to bring a discussion over here, which today, in a modern culture, is something that many people find challenging to consider, because we see that this is a discussion of should women cover their hair. And today we see that in modern cultures, women do not cover their hair. But we're going to see over here that it is a practice of people for thousands of years that married women did cover their hair. And the question is, what is the proper conduct over here? Now, he's going to discuss this based on we're going to see he's going to bring that not only is there a Jewish practice that the married woman should cover their hair, but we're going to see, he's going to show us that there's actually a practice. He's going to quote from Roman times the importance that women, non-Jewish women, actually covered their hair after they were married. So let's see this discussion over here. Sham So he's quoting from this other sefer, this Bris Menucha, that included in this commandment, do not follow the practices of those non-Jews whose way of living, their mannerisms, their customs, their practices, their dress are not in accordance with the service of God Almighty. One of those is the literally Gilui Sar Ba'isha, the revealing of the hair of a woman. Shekaro Hachwenuzal Mesechtes Ksubas Iveres al Das Yehudis Kol Sheyetze V'Reisha Perua. This is referred to by the Torah sages in the Talmudic tractate of Ksubas on the 72nd page on the first side, that a person is going against the religion of the children of Israel, of the Jewish people, or any woman who goes out and her hair is exposed, meaning to say Reisha Perua, means to say her hair is literally unkempt. It's meaning to say it's exposed. Shezem midas tznius, that this is a attribute of modesty, of a woman concealing parts of herself and herself in a way that she's not open and exposed, includes covering her hair. That is the custom of the daughters of Israel. It's something that is agreed to in the written Torah, and it is explicit in the Mishnah, the compilation of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi of the laws, of the practical applications of the laws of the Torah. But Talmud, as we just said, the Talmud is the discussions, a record of all the discussions. Not all the discussions, but a lot of discussion. Is some over 7,000 pages of large pages of Talmudic discussion that are recorded. And all the halachic decisors, all those that write what is the bottom line of proper conduct according to Torah law, all agree without anyone disagreeing that a woman must cover her hair. And a woman, here we're talking about a Jewish woman who uncovers her hair, is proper to be called that she is being like rebellious. She is being defiant. And against the religion, against the beliefs of Moses, our teacher, and of the Jewish, it's Yehudis over here. It's saying the Jewish women. She is transgressing against Judaism. V'gufa nishmasa hi ovedis, and her body and her soul she is losing. Adkan. This is the end of the quote. Now we continue on to test. V'hevi misham, and he brings from there. 1661, one of a Christian writer that's printed in a book according to the year calculations of the Christians, that they count from a certain event the years, which is not the Torah counting. The Torah counting counts the years from the beginning of creation, but the Christians count the years from the year zero, and by their calculations, by the birth of their God. And he says, so this is 1661 in the non-Jewish calendar. Shekasav sharesh haroyimim shmei kama sufitzio. But he writes there, this Christian writer is writing about one of the heads. I don't know if it's the head of the Caesar, or prior to the existence of the Caesars, there's some head Roman that his name was Kama Sufiziu. Not sure the exact pronunciation. That was his name. He existed a long time before the invention of the faith of the Christians. So he was obviously not a contemporary, a Roman at the time of the invention of Christianity, but it was much before that. Shegirash ishtay, that he divorced his wife, that she went out with her hair revealed, without a covering on her head. And he writes on this. Now he's going back to the Jewish Torah writer that's quoting this non-Jewish book, writing about this Roman leader, that the sages write, back to the top of it, Shekol zman she'ein ala isha redid kol hanoshim. Any time that's not on the woman's hair an actual head covering, like a not a hat, but a full encompassing head covering, cover her hair. Okay, we're talking about only with the hair here. There's the Torah does not promote or have a concept of covering the face of the woman, but her hair should be covered. So if she doesn't go with this full-fledged hair covering, even though she goes out with her hair covered with mitzpach, like a handkerchief, like a kerchief, handkerchief. Nikras Iveras Aldasi, with this, she's called going against, she's transgressing the belief of the Jewish people. The kansuha shetetze shalok beksuva, that the penalty that she receives for uncovering her hair is that in the case if her husband divorces her, she loses her ksuba, which means to say that according to Torah marriage, a woman is given many assurances. She's going to commit herself to a man. The man has to give her many assurances and promises and contractual commitments in order to reassure her that he will defend and protect her and provide for her and for her offspring. So that has requirements that provide her. He has to provide her food and clothing and shelter, and he has to provide her intimate relations. And in the event that he should divorce her, he has to pay her a sum of money so that she does not go to the marriage with nothing. She goes into the marriage with a sum of money that gives her the opportunity. She gives her the ability to take care of herself. So this is a requirement in a Jewish marriage, that there's this ksuba, but that's the ksuba is the document, but the ksuba is also referring to this right of having this payment made to her that she's going to have in the case the marriage comes to an end, God forbid. So there are certain acts that a woman, if she does them, it would cause her to forfeit this financial compensation. And one of them is walking around with her hair uncovered in public. And the reason for this is that since among the nations was the custom, this custom to be modest with the covering of the head, the custom of the non-Jews was not to go around with a full head covering, but rather a handkerchief was enough. Some sort of like a lighter, less complete covering was sufficient. Therefore, the daughters of Israel, the Jewish women, were more stringent upon themselves, specifically to cover their heads with a fixed covering, with this redid. And not merely with a handkerchief that is temporary and is comparable to being revealed. And that's the end of his quote. So it's interesting over here that the I want to see over here for a second. What does it say? So we see that the nations as a whole had have a practice and a custom to cover their hair, but in a temporary, flimsy way, so to speak. And the daughters of Israel, the daughters of Israel, meaning the women of Israel, took upon themselves to be more stringent than the rest of the nations, and to put a fixed head covering on that would be something that would be solidly on their head while they were in public. And that's to go to become more lenient and go from the more stringent covering to the less stringent covering of the rest of the nations is itself a problem sufficient that itself is going against the customs of the Jewish people, the practice of the Jewish people, the belief of the Jewish people, that that if she conducts herself with a simple temporary head covering that the non-Jews are wearing, that would be a violation of the belief of the Jewish people, which is to have a fixed head covering. So we see two things happening at the same time. We see that the custom of the nations of the non-Jews as a whole was that the women covered their hair, but they covered their hair in like a flimsy way. And the Jewish women took upon themselves not to suffice with a flimsy head covering, but to cover themselves with a more permanent and more stronger, more effective head covering when they're in public. And now he brings another conversation in regards to what is an appropriate head covering. And the question is, how should a woman cover her hair? So she can cover herself with like a fixed head covering that's not simply flimsy and comes off very easily. But there's an opinion that actually to wear a wig made of hair of a non-Jewish woman's hair. So this is a conversation that goes on among the Jewish people. And we see that today, most Torah-observant Jewish women cover their hair in public with a wig. Although there are opinions we're going to see right here that is not acceptable, and they should not cover their hair with a wig from a non-Jewish woman. They should cover their hair with a something that is a solid covering, but it is not a wig. Now, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was very much, well, let's look in here and then we'll discuss what the practical halacha is of this. So this is Rabbi Steif writing over here. So about the matter of whether the matter of wearing a wig, for a Jewish woman to wear a wig to cover her hair, which gives you a fixed covering, and I'll explain in a second why the Lubavitcher Rebbe encouraged that. But I am a Sefer Divrei Chaim, see in the words of the Divrei Chaim, a holy work of the words of life, Shepasak le'asur, that his determination is that it's forbidden to wear a wig. V'chein b'sefer Mikre de V'ayim b'tsh, also this sefer, V'ayim b'tshuvas b'hagain, Rabbi Lazar, Plexlis, Ubachrenim she'arichu b'zeh, and others that wrote in great detail about this, and Mitzvos Hashem R Steif, and the will, the directive to his spiritual directive is a physical will, writing about a person's possessions. Some people also write a spiritual will, directing children of future generations on how to conduct themselves, in the Hashem R Steif, who had a yeshiva in Pressburg in the 1800s. He forbade his offspring to go with a wig made out of non-Jewish hair. So the question is, so just as an interesting aside over here, not really a side, just that while we're addressing this issue. So first of all, it's not this debatable, it's not up for discussion that woman must cover her hair. That is the conclusion of all practices. All the Jewish people agree to that and should be covering their hair. Any Torah observant woman covers her hair. The question is, how does she cover her hair? So we see that it's important that she cover it as carefully as possible and in a way that's not easily going to come off. So contrasting that with the temporary type flimsy covering that a non-Jewish woman were accustomed to wear. So the question is, what about this wig covering? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that there are people that do permit it, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe encouraged it. There should be this covering because he said that in our generations, because the women are more in the marketplace, more in the world than in previous generations, and if a woman's wearing a covering, even a covering, hair covering that is more firm compared to a flimsy covering, but it's a firm covering, but it's still very easy for her to pull it off because she's able to she could reveal her hair. Let's say she could leave the Jewish community, she could go with, leave her house with her hair covered with some sort of head covering. And then when she gets to work, she could take it off because she feels more comfortable, doesn't feel comfortable wearing it in the workplace. And she wants to emulate the other women, getting back to this point of emulating the practices of other people. Because remember, today we're living in a time where most non-Jewish women are walking around with their hair uncovered. So if you're living in a time where all the non-Jewish women are covering their hair, the non-Jewish women are covering their hair with a flimsy covering, and a Jewish woman is going to wear a more firm covering, that she doesn't look out of the ordinary with the non-Jewish woman. She's not going to feel a social pressure to wear a flimsy covering versus a firm covering. There's no social judgment, and there's no sense of being out of the ordinary if you're wearing a more firm covering versus a flimsy covering. It's all within the general surroundings of everyone's covering their hair. But you come to modern times when the non-Jewish women have lost connection with their own traditions, and over the last few hundred years in Western cultures, in European cultures, women have stopped covering their hair. If you go to Arab cultures, you see that women until recently covered their hair after marriage. It still happens in observant Arab cultures. In fact, in some Arab cultures, the girls cover their hair from even before marriage. And then in many Asian cultures, women cover their hair. And so it's still places where this practice of covering their hair still is prevalent. But in most places in the world, where the Jewish people are found, the women are not covering their hair. The non-Jews are not covering their hair. So the Rebbe's point is like this: a Jewish woman within her community is going to feel the social acceptance, and the norm is to cover the hair. She'll cover her hair, and that's fine if there's women who are homemakers and they're taking care of their kids and they're around other Jewish women. That's the standard that they're living by. But when women are going out to become teachers, and we have many women that are going out into business and going out into the world and so forth, into professions, which is a separate discussion about that. But the point is they are. So if they're going to wear snood, something that's going to cover their hair, even though it's more, it's not going to fall off on its own, like a handkerchief could, like it's not flimsy that'll fall off on its own, but nevertheless, it will, first of all, it could slip back. And second of all, a woman might be inclined to just take it off. It would be very tempting to take it off and not be the only woman in a workforce of 3 women, 10 women, 100 women, 1,000 women she's the only one covering her hair. So she's going to feel pressure to take it off. So the Rebbe says, therefore, of the choices of how to cover our hair, the appropriate way to cover the hair is with a wig. A woman should cover her hair with a wig because that's not something you can take off. You can't show up for work. You can't leave your home wearing a wig with a certain hairstyle, show up at work like that, and then take it off and have a different hairstyle. That's not how it doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right. No one's going to do that. So in fact, if they're comfortable in the wig, which they're surely going to choose one that makes them feel good, then they're going to feel good wearing the wig. And some people will notice and some people won't notice. But there's not going to be an inclination to try to emulate the non-Jewish woman by taking it off and leaving her hair uncovered. So, of course, there's an argument by those that say, no, that shouldn't be permitted. A woman should not wear a wig. And in fact, they put a lot of effort, those that oppose this idea, some of the Sephardim particularly, they oppose the idea. They try to say, no, that's not, they should get her a beautiful head covering. But this is a debate that's ongoing. Although most of the Torah observant women today, especially those that are actually in let's say America, in Europe and so forth, are wearing wigs to cover their hair when they're outside their house. So we could see over here that the Rebbe is actually being sensitive, even though there's advantages to the non-wig coverings. The Rebbe is being sensitive to the fact that we will feel pressured to emulate the non-Jews by uncovering the hair. So he's saying it's a better solution to cover the hair with something that is going to be permanently on and has no chance not only of falling off, but of being taken off. And therefore that, he suggests, is to wear a wig. So that is the concept today. But you see how we are focused on making sure that we're not emulating the conduct of the non-Jews. Now, I was going to look up over here, and I hopefully look up for next time. I don't want to make everyone wait. But I believe there's another point where Rabbi Steif, I'm going to look this up again, but the Rabbi Steif talks about these concepts of modesty and the concept that all the concepts of modesty that apply to Jewish women apply to non-Jewish women. I'll get back to you next time. Hopefully I'll get a chance to look this up again. It's been a while since I looked into this particular in Rabbi Steif's work in his another holy book that he wrote called Chumash Lemudei Hevaya, the 5 books of Moses, the teachings of God Almighty. And I'll take a look at that. But it would seem that the proper conduct is even for a non-Jewish woman to cover her hair based on this was the custom in previous times, that it's an act of modesty for a non-Jewish woman to cover her hair. And we can get into that in more detail. Although his intention here is he's not bringing out this at this point, the lesson of how a non-Jewish woman should conduct herself in regards to her hair and her modesty, so much as to make sure that that he's writing here that we shouldn't be emulating the ways of those that are their services foreign to God Almighty by uncovering their hair. So we'll see what that means in further learning together. Any questions? Okay. Good to see you all. And God willing, we'll continue next week. And we have learning this week. We have the Wednesday night, we have the prayer learning. And then we have Thursday night, we have the leaders meeting. Hope all of you choose to, if you're not already signed up as leaders, sign up as leaders. There's the sign up form on the rabbismith.org. Send me an email or message. I can send you the links. Make sure to sign up as a leader and to participate in the leaders meetings. And to, last week was our 4th meeting, and had a lot of great action items everyone's taking. And what we do is we talk about something related to the time and to the parsha and the Torah lessons of the time, and then we talk about an action everyone is encouraged to take, but then in the following week we report on our actions and we talk about the difficulties we had and share inspiration from the things we did, the things that we didn't do exactly, didn't work out right. We learn from that, and then we take on actions for the next week. So it's a beautiful, beautiful experience, and we're really working to develop ourselves as leaders. And that for the non-Jewish is the Zachari 823 track, and for the Jews it's the Ryan Mehemna Shliach 2.0 track. Make sure that you're signed up and join this really exciting work that we're doing. Okay, God bless you all. Thank you very much for being here and learning together.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye-bye.
Bye.